Ever felt like you're deciphering an alien language when you first open a new piece of software?
Oh, absolutely. All those icons, the
That
setting.
can be really overwhelming, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, you're not alone. Today on the deep dive, we're tackling that initial hurdle head on. We're looking at this unique architectural design software called the Architect's Desktop, or TAD.
That's right. And we've been digging into the materials, YouTube videos showing TAD, its docs, Reddit, LinkedIn.
The whole lot.
Exactly. And what emerges is, well, it's a picture of a program with a really surprising history, actually. Started in India back in 1989.
Wow, 89, that's quite early.
Yeah. And a fundamentally different approach to design compared to the big names people know. AutoCAD architecture, BuzzCAD BIM, Chief Architect, Revit, ArchiCAD, Allplan, all of those.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our goal today, really, specifically for you listening, is to dig into TAD's onboarding experience, that first critical encounter, and see how it stacks up against getting started with those, let's say, more established platforms.
Right. We want to pinpoint the potential, stumbling blocks, the usability issues.
But also maybe find those moments that could genuinely make learning TAD maybe surprisingly smooth or even enjoyable.
Exactly. Opportunities for delight, as they say, in usability. But to do that well, we first need to get a handle on the core principles behind TAD.
Okay.
And one of the biggest takeaways, really, is that TAD isn't just another BIM or CAD program. It's explicitly presented as a different approach.
And that long history, since 89, continuous use.
Apparently so, which, potentially makes it one of the oldest BIM-type applications out there, even if it wasn't widely known globally back then.
So how is it so different? What's the core distinction from, say, Revit or ArchiCAD?
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Unlike most software where you start by drawing walls or beams or slabs.
The physical stuff.
Right, the built matter. CAD flips that completely. Its whole philosophy is about designing from the very, very beginning by arranging spaces.
Spaces first, like bubble diagrams almost.
Exactly like that. The idea is that walls, floors, roofs, they emerge as a consequence of how you define and relate those spaces.
That actually sounds quite intuitive from an architect's conceptual thinking standpoint, doesn't it? Focus on the program, the function.
It really does align with that early stage thinking, focusing on the living room, the office before the specific wall construction.
Okay, that's a major philosophical shift. What else?
Well, another big one. TAD explicitly does not do drafting.
Wait, no drafting? In an architectural software, how does that work?
It sounds counterintuitive, I know.
Yeah.
The workflow is, you develop the core design, the spatial concept, within TAD. Then you export it.
Export it to what? Regular CAD?
Yeah, export to standard CAD software for producing the detailed drawings, the documentation, all that.
So TAD is purely for the conceptual, the schematic phase.
Pretty much. It's described as sparse software, intentional minimalism, fewer commands, meant for supposedly experienced architects to work quickly.
Interesting. So not for junior staff churning out drawings, but for the lead designer making core decisions.
That seems to be the target user, yeah. Avoiding the complexity overload you get in some massive BIM suites, it kind of forces a separation between concept and documentation.
Which some might actually like, I suppose. Keeps things focused.
Could be. And the documentation claims it's extremely simple, that senior architects pick it up fast. We'll see about that when we look at usability later, though.
Okay. Any other core ideas we need to know?
Yes. It uses object-oriented programming concepts, spaces, elements. They're organized into classes in a hierarchy.
Like smart objects that know what they are. A room class, maybe?
Exactly. A room class, an external wall class. Each has properties, maybe behaviors. It helps structure the model logically, apparently aids in explaining the design.
And that structure probably helps later with getting info out, like areas.
Presumably, yes. It also talks about loose-limbed designing, letting architects approach the start in different ways, developing their own discipline.
Flexible, but maybe less prescriptive than some BIM tools?
That seems to be the idea, and it's positioned as more than just a design tool. It's a platform.
Platform, meaning?
Meaning you can build on it, create custom scripts, add-ons, extensions. We call them probes sometimes.
Using what? Some special language.
Yes, its own scripting language called ARDELA. It stands for Architectural Design Language. And interestingly, it's based on Prolog.
Prolog. That's a logic programming language, isn't it? Quite different from Python or C#.
Very different. Focuses on logical rules and relationships. Fits the overall philosophy, perhaps.
Okay, one last thing before we see it in action. Cost. Availability.
Oh. Right.
Right.
The current versions, 7.x, are free and open source. You do need to register, but still, that's a big accessibility point.
Free and open source.
Right.
Okay. So distinct philosophy, spatial focus, no drafting, extendable via prologue-based scripting. Got it.
That's the foundation.
Now let's get into the nitty-gritty. What's it actually like to use for the first time? Let's walk through that first steps with TAD video.
Okay, so the video kicks off with a default model file loaded up. But importantly, it notes you can swap this out for your own template.
Good. So you're not forced into one starting point. What's the first action?
The first real design action is creating objects. These are your design elements, spaces, eventually other things.
And these go into those classes you mentioned.
Exactly. You see them organized in a tree structure on the side of the screen. The first task shown is super basic, just dragging a rectangle in the empty white space.
You make a room, like a living room.
Precisely. And as you drag, you get this real-time dimension readout.
Oh, that's nice. Instant feedback on the size. Some tools make you click and then type dimensions later.
Yeah, this seemed quite immediate. Then it introduces these unique interface elements, the red dot and the blue dot.
Dots. What are they for?
They're called helpers. And there's also the architect, a little square symbol with a point.
Helpers and an architect. Okay, that's different terminology. What do they do?
Yeah. They're key for manipulating things and moving around the site, which is the main workspace. The architect icon apparently represents your viewpoint in the plan.
So you move the architect icon to pan around?
Sort of, yeah. Dragging it moves your viewpoint, and you get feedback dimensions, perpendicular distances relative to the helpers.
And the helpers, the dots.
You can move them too, using F3 and F4 keys, or clicking. They seem to act like temporary reference points or manipulation handles.
Interesting. It all sounds very plan-based.
Extremely plan-based. The presenter even says that elevations are initially laid out on the ground in the plan view.
Laid out on the ground? What does that even mean? Like drawing the facade flat on the floor plan?
That's how it sounds. You draw the outline, then assign height properties later. It's a massive departure from how you'd work in Revit or ArchiCAD, setting levels and drawing walls vertically.
Wow, okay, that's a big mental model shift right there for anyone used to standard BIM or even 3D CAD.
Definitely. And selection is also specific. You drag a box, but it has to cover the corners of the objects you want to select.
Not just touch the object.
Doesn't look like it. Needs to encompass the corners. Dragging again unselects. Deleting is straightforward, just hitting delete.
And zooming.
Zooming is done by dragging a rectangle around the area you want to fill the view. That's pretty common, actually.
Okay, so back to creating spaces. The video shows a bedroom next.
Yep, creates another rectangle for a bedroom, but leaves a deliberate gap between it and the living room.
A gap. Why? For the wall.
To represent the eventual wall thickness, yes. But the key point made is you're not drawing the wall itself yet. You're defining the spaces and their relationships.
Sticking to that core philosophy.
Right. Then comes something pretty unique. You select those two spaces.
The living room and bedroom rectangles.
And use a command called create envelope. You give it an offset value.
An offset, like for the wall thickness.
Exactly. And boom, it automatically generates the external walls around the selected spaces and the internal dividing wall between them based on that offset.
Whoa. Okay, that is a different way to build a floor plan. Instead of drawing wall segments, you define spaces and then wrap them.
It really highlights that focus on logical relationships first, graphics second. The video touches briefly on reshaping things, adding corners, shifting them, making curves, but doesn't go deep there.
So we have a basic plan built from spaces and an envelope, but architecture needs 3D. How does TAD handle the jump from that plan to a visualization?
Good question. The video moves on to that. The 3D view setup is managed through a special view class.
Oh, another class.
Yep. Inside this class, there are objects called location and look at.
Okay, sounds like camera position and target point.
That's essentially it. Defines where the camera is and where it's pointing in 3D space. You can double-click them in the plan to see where they are represented.
Can you move them around easily?
Seems so. The video shows using those helpers, the red and blue dots, to actually drag the camera location around in the plan view.
Okay, setting up the view in plan, then what? A render button.
There's a preview button for the 3D view. But as the video clarifies, clicking it initially doesn't show much of a building.
Why not? We made spaces and walls. Sort of.
Because everything created so far is still fundamentally 2D, just shapes on the ground plane.
Ah, okay. So how do you give them height? Extrude them.
It's done through properties.
Yeah.
You go to the class that the objects belong to, say a first floor class.
Right.
And you modify its level property, which is like the z height or base elevation,
Okay.
and its height property. Once those are set for the class,
Then the objects in that class become 3D.
exactly, the 2D shapes get extruded vertically based on those class properties.
Mhm.
Then you see the 3D forms in the preview.
So it's an indirect way of creating the 3D geometry tied to the class definition.
Seems that way. And once you have that basic 3D, you can start getting info out. The video shows getting the area of the envelope, for instance.
Useful. Can you easily change things?
It demonstrates moving the bedroom object to a different level, presumably by changing its class or properties, and the 3D view updates.
Okay, so some flexibility there.
And it also shows dynamic editing using Control Backspace to delete vertices from the envelope shape, which then updates the 3D form. Suggests a kind of fluid, sketching-like refinement is possible.
All right. We've seen the basic workflow. Spaces, envelopes, class properties for height, previewing in 3D. It's definitely unique.
It is. And that uniqueness brings us squarely to the onboarding challenges and usability.
Exactly. Let's put on our heuristic evaluation hats. How might someone coming from AutoCAD architecture or Revit or chief architect react to this? What are the big hurdles?
Okay, benchmarking against those common tools. The absolute biggest potential issue is the novelty of the core design paradigm.
The whole spaces first thing and the plan-based elevation.
Absolutely. It's just fundamentally different from layer-based CAD or the feature-driven direct manipulation of building elements you find in most BIM software, whether it's Revit, ArchiCAD, or even the more user-friendly Chief Architect, which still starts with walls.
It requires a completely different mental model from day one. That's a huge ask.
It is. You have to unlearn some deeply ingrained habits. Second big point, the unusual terminology.
Right. Architect, helpers, atoms, envelopes, connectors, even ARDELA.
None of those are standard industry terms you'd find in, say, BricsCAD BIM or all-plan documentation. It's like learning a specific dialect for this one piece of software.
Which inevitably adds friction to the learning curve, doesn't it?
It does. You're not just learning how to do something, but also what everything is called in this specific context.
Okay, what else? The interface seemed quite minimal in the videos.
Yeah, the sparse interface. While the goal might be efficiency for experts, for a newcomer, it could feel, well, empty or restrictive.
Less discoverable. If you're used to ribbons like in Revit or comprehensive toolbars like ArchiCAD.
Exactly. You might feel lost, wondering where all the tools are.
Yeah.
It relies more on knowing the commands or concepts rather than browsing icons.
Like a minimalist toolkit versus a big toolbox. Good for pros, maybe daunting for beginners.
Potentially, yes. Then there's the abstraction over immediate visual gratification.
Meaning you don't see the pretty 3D building right away.
Right. You're working with these logical spaces and relationships in plan first. The 3D extrusion comes later. Users who like immediate visual feedback, maybe coming from SketchUp or even just modeling directly in other BIM tools, might find that delay frustrating.
I can see that. And the whole lack of integrated drafting.
That's a big workflow difference. Needing to export to separate CAD software adds a step and potentially data translation issues.
Unlike every single benchmark tool we mentioned, AutoCAD architecture, BricsCAD BIM, Chief Architect, Revit, ArchiCAD, all-plan, they all have integrated drafting.
Correct. So that's a clear functional gap compared to the competition, forcing a multi-software workflow for documentation.
What about learning resources? You mentioned the videos and docs.
That's another potential pain point. The creator themselves admits the documentation and videos are incomplete.
Ouch. That makes self-learning really tough.
Especially compared to the vast resources available for Autodesk products or Graphisoft's Learn portal. Good documentation is critical for onboarding.
And support, if you get stuck.
There is a Discord community, which is good. But the level and responsiveness of community support likely can't match the huge forums and official support channels for the major established players yet.
Makes sense. A smaller user base means a smaller support network.
And finally, two more things. The scripting language, ARDELA. Even if it's easy, learning Prolog is a barrier compared to visual scripting like Dynamo or Grasshopper.
Right. Visual programming is often seen as more accessible for designers than text-based coding, especially something like Prolog.
And just the overall potential for confusion with things like plan-based elevations and the abstract location lookat for 3D views, it might just feel counterintuitive initially.
Okay, so quite a few potential usability hurdles, especially when benchmarked against the expectations set by more conventional software. It sounds like a steep climb initially.
It certainly could be. There's a definite learning curve involved in grasping the philosophy and the mechanics.
But it can't all be hurdles, can it? A system with this unique history and approach must have some upsides, some potential aha moments or delightful experiences for users who do get over that initial hump.
Oh, absolutely. There are definitely potential delightful moments here. The most striking one is the claimed speed and incredibly small file sizes.
You mentioned a hospital model in kilobytes.
Yeah, the example given was 274 KB for a whole hospital. If that's typical,
Yeah.
well, it's astounding compared to the often massive file sizes of Revit or ArchiCAD projects.
That could be a huge wow factor. Imagine faster loading, easier sharing, less strain on hardware.
Exactly. That efficiency could be genuinely delightful, especially on large or complex projects.
What else?
The ability to query the design very early on, getting areas, quantities, maybe running FSI calculations using those ARDELA probes.
Even from a schematic design.
That's the idea. Getting objective data out almost immediately could give architects a real sense of control and informed decision-making right from the start. That's quite powerful.
I like that. Tying analysis directly to the early conceptual phase.
Then there's the core logical design thinking itself. For architects who really value focusing on spatial relationships and the why of the design.
TID's approach might feel more natural, more aligned with how they actually think.
Precisely. It could be a refreshing change from getting bogged down in construction details too early. It resonates with good architectural practice.
And the extendability through ARDELA, despite the learning curve.
It offers real power. The potential to create truly custom tools, analysis scripts, automated checks tailored to your specific workflow using a logic-based language that's very flexible.
For users willing to invest the time, it could unlock unique capabilities.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And the inverted process itself, spaces first, form emerges, could be quite insightful.
That Buddhist verse analogy they used. Emptiness creating form.
Yeah, it highlights that unique philosophical underpinning. For some users, experiencing that different way of thinking digitally could be a delight in itself, a fresh perspective.
And finally, the simple fact that versions 7.x are free and open source.
Can't overlook that. It lowers the barrier to entry significantly, especially for students, small firms, independent architects, or users in regions where software costs are prohibitive. Accessibility is a big plus.
Okay, so it's a real mix, isn't it?
Yeah.
TAD presents this fascinating contrast.
But it really does.
On one hand, a potentially steep learning curve, especially if you're coming from standard CAD or BIM. You've got novel concepts, unusual terms, a sparse interface, incomplete docs.
All true, significant onboarding challenges.
But on the other hand, potential for incredible speed and efficiency, early stage analysis, a focus on core architectural thinking, deep customizability, and it's free.
Yeah, it offers a compelling alternative if you're willing to embrace its different approach.
So wrapping this up for you, the listener, exploring a tool like TAD, which is so fundamentally different, clearly needs an open mind. You have to be willing to challenge your usual workflows.
The question to ask yourself is, could its focus on early conceptualization, its speed, its lightweight nature, actually solve a problem you have? Could it help you gain that architectural insight faster, more thoughtfully?
Which brings us to a final thought. In this software world that often seems dominated by complexity, by ever more features, is there real value in a tool that deliberately steps back? A tool that prioritizes core thinking, efficiency?
Even if it means learning a less conventional path.
Exactly. Could TAD's precursor to BIM idea that focus on spatial logic first actually offer a valuable, maybe even a better perspective for arriving at well-considered architectural designs?
It's a provocative question. Maybe it encourages a different kind of architectural outcome.
Perhaps. We definitely encourage you to check out the links, maybe even download TAD 7.x since it's free, and see for yourself, form your own opinion.
Yeah, give it a try if it sounds intriguing.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.